All right, so here I am, 1970. I'm about 10 years old. I'm living in New Haven, Connecticut, a nice seaside city of about, I think about 100,000 then. The air is brown and doesn't smell very good. The water is pretty polluted. There's very little treatment of even the raw sewage that we can smell from our class windows. And there's a big old coal-burning power plant right on the water, right on the Long Island Sound. Things seem kind of dire and don't look like we kind of get used to it, but some people get very tired. Nope, we're going to start this over again. Okay, good. 1, 2, 3. Well, in 1970, I was about 10 years old. I lived in New Haven, Connecticut. It is a nice seaside town, and I think there were about 100,000 people there, and it wasn't that large. But as I sat in my classroom, I could look up at the sky, and the air was very brown. The water was very brown, and it smelled awful. It had very high concentrations of untreated raw sewage. And we had a very large coal-burning power plant that was releasing high sulfur coal effluent day and night. So what happened next? Well, the largest piece of legislation that had been introduced to address environmental control came into being. It was signed by President Nixon, 1970, and it was called the Clean Air Act, and it ushered in just a slew of environmental protection legislation through the federal government. It is the nation's premier law for protecting the public health and the environment from dangerous air pollution. You know, it created the APA. Oh, in addition, Earth Day was devised to celebrate the beginning of the Clean Air Act. One of the things that the EPA was designed to do was to establish standards. We've talked about that before. The National Ambient Air Quality Standards, NAAQS, set limits for many, many air pollutants. The Act calls for states in the EPA to solve multiple air pollution problems through programs, and they're based on the latest science and technology information. EPA is also a policing agency. They can render fines, and they also have been told part of their role is to help governments or local governments and companies come under compliance with their standards. In 1990, amendments called the Acid Rain Program, or ARP, were put into the Clean Air Act to address the acidic oxides. Remember, oxides is oxygen, and SOx and NOx are the acidic oxides specifically. And the focus kind of changed in 1990. They also had the Pollution Prevention Act, and now we're going into prevention of pollutants. And that makes more sense economically as well as efficiency-wise. And then today we are also working under a large piece of legislation called the Clean Air Interstate Rule, or CARE, which was established by the Bush administration in 2005. And that was to target ozone and very small particle matter, 2.5 micron. And to do that, they have to further reduce SOx and NOx. Those two guys are considered secondary pollutants, the ozone and the PM 2.5, and they have to be dealt with by reducing the primary SOx and NOx. And the Clean Air Act has been under scrutiny and disdain at times since its inception. And The important tenet of the Clean Air Act is that they have to have a peer review, independent cost-benefit analysis. We mentioned this very slightly when we were talking about risk analysis, but the first retrospective was done in 97, and you notice that they also do one every 20 years or 10 years, I'm not positive, I'm sorry, but it is been shown every single one of the studies, it has been that the benefits greatly outweigh the costs. The benefits are, for the most part, going to be health benefits, and the costs are going to be for technology, equipment, and are the onus of companies. So there is always going to be friction between that. Okay, 1990 to 2010, the cost-benefit analysis gave 4-to-1, and then the newest report that was issued in 2011 also did a projection to 2020. I showed you a slide way back that showed it was 30-to-1, and that in 2010 the Clean Air Act saved $1.3 trillion. What is it addressing? Well, primarily the big six plus VOCs, those volatile organic compounds. Okay? And there are the primary sources listed first in these. So SO2 is from coal burning power plants, the sulfur is in the coal, NOx is from internal combustion engines. They generate so much heat they can convert N2 and O2 in our air into NOx. CO is for incomplete combustion, carbon monoxide. Lead is pretty much obliterated now because we've taken it out of gasoline. And then PM10, PM2.5 particle matter, tiny particle matter, and that stuff comes in a variety of sources. And remember, the 2.5 is scary because it can get into deep into your lungs, into your bloodstream, and then really irritate your cardiovascular system. VOCs, these are a huge group of volatile organic compounds. Volatile means that they just evaporate easily. So organic is a carbon base where the carbon forms chains of carbon-carbon bonds. They come from all sorts of different sources, from paints all the way down to, I think the book mentions the pine smell as you walk through the forest. So anyway, the secondary is our ozone and our PM. Okay, now here is the good news. This is pretty remarkable. I cannot find a 1970 to 2012 drop or scale or graph. So we're going to go from 1980 to 2012 unless noted. You'll notice down at the bottom, that's what I'm referring to. They didn't used to measure the particle matter, 10 and 2.5, so that's why they have truncated ranges. Sulfur dioxide, gee, many Christmas, down 78% in air quality. That's finding how much is in the air. Carbon monoxide down 83, lead 91, nitrogen oxide 55, and then the particle matter down 40. And then for emissions are down 72, 65, 99. Remember, that's the gasoline, so she's pretty much out of there. Nitrogen oxides, minus 60, minus 50, 70, 60. What I would like you to remember, if you would please, is, well, we're just going to take lead out of there because she has been pretty much taken away from the no lead gasoline. So it's fine. I'd like you to remember the top three reductions in air quality. We've got number 1, carbon monoxide, number 2, SO2, number 3, NOx. All right. This is a wonderful graph from the EPA, and it demonstrates that we started in 1970 with the start of the Clean Air Act. We ended in 2012. Our gross domestic product, a measure of how our economy has grown, it has gone up over 200% since this should be 70, sorry. And here, down for the big six, that is down minus 72%. That is an incredibly credible result of a lot of work. Number of miles traveled, look at that. So the cars are still spewing out this stuff, but they have improved and reduced the amount of toxins coming out of the cars. The population has changed from 200,000 to 300,000 and counting. Energy consumption, that's pretty good. We've gone up 50% energy consumption, but we have our economy has grown that much, our population's grown that much, and CO2 emissions has gone down as well. Here's another graph that shows then just a lovely drop down from 1980 to 2006. It's a beautiful thing. And some of the issues today, this is from William Ruckelshaus, who headed the EPA under Richard Nixon. He says, you know, to a certain extent, we're a victim of our own success. Right now, the EPA is under sharp criticism. This is in 2012, and the discussion about shutting down the government, and one of the conditions was to get rid of the EPA. It was the same condition that when they shut down the government in 1995, they demanded that the EPA be dismantled. So right now the EPA is under sharp criticism, partially because it's not as obvious to people that pollution problems exist and that we need to deal with them. I just really enjoyed this picture, except for the loss of the Twin Towers, but this is the New York City skyline, and this is 1973, and this is today from the same place. The Clean Air Act, what's it doing today? What's it up to? And what are the future challenges? Well, let's go down the timeline from 2009. The biggest thing that happened is in 2007, the Supreme Court agreed with the EPA, saying, and also the Massachusetts State Court, that the EPA had under its umbrella the need to control and write standards for greenhouse gas emissions. So that's CO2 and 5 other greenhouse gases. So now CO2 is considered an air pollutant. That is, it endangers public health and welfare. Okay, then in 2000, these are for standard pollutants. 2010, tighter standards for the ozone PM 2.5 VOCs, and that's part of that CARE. And then this got a lot of press, especially in Ohio, the mercury and atmospheric toxins standard, air toxic standards. And they are primarily mercury and other heavy metals. And this is the first time, believe it or not, there have ever been standards put forth for these. And they will be applied to coal and oil-fired power plants. That is where this stuff comes from. We've got the acidic gases, the SO2 and the NOx, but we also have nickel, arsenic. Oh, there's NOx. I wonder why. I should consider that as acid gas too. Mercury, which is awful for you. And I think they must have added these all together. Okay, and then chromium. So here are our gases. Let's start over again with this. Okay. I'm going to erase now. Okay, so where is the Clean Air Act today, and what are its future challenges? So what's it doing? What's it been doing? Let's look back to 2009 and then go up to 2013. And 2009 is probably the biggest thing that's happened. In 2009, the EPA completed a scientific determination that greenhouse gases endanger the public health and welfare. That is, they're an air pollutant. So they fall under the umbrella of the Clean Air Act. And this went through the courts. And in fact, in 2007, the Supreme Court said, yes, this should be under the Clean Air Act. And so now, let's jump forward. We can jump forward down to 2013, where the Clean Power Plan, the EPA has issued performance standards for new power plants. They are still working it out with public hearings and public input, and that includes from companies such as American Electric Power and other electricity generating companies, and working on existing power plants. The new tighter standards for ozone, VOC, and particle matter 2.5 micron, that's part of the CARE, and that is tighter standards for those must come from tighter standards for the SO2 and NOx primary. This one has gotten a lot of attention. This is the first ever standards for heavy metals. Believe it or not, the 1970s Clean Air Act did not have this. And people have been squawking about that ever since, because these things are very, very toxic to human life and to any kind of biologicals in the ground. The Act principally addresses mercury, but it is many of the other heavy metals, and it applies to coal or oil-fired power plants because that is by far the most plentiful source of these. So we have mercury coming out. That's portion 50% comes from coal burning and oil-fired power plants. Nickel, chromium, and arsenic. Called MAT. It's the Mercury and Air Toxic Standards. What does this one mean to Ohio? We've got the largest number of coal-burning power plants, more than Pennsylvania, even. We routinely would rank number 1 for the amount of toxic air pollutants that we emitted. That's not true. That was 2010 was the last time. Today we're number 3. That was the last one I can find. 2012 was the last published, and we were number 3 after Texas and Louisiana. So we put out a lot here, and power plants put out the more than half. So those are where the MATS Act is addressing. AEP will accelerate. They're closing some of the older generators. They are concerned that it will cost jobs. The environmental advocates say, well, it's going to save a huge amount in medical savings and personal anguish for the people. And also, too, the EPA says that without a doubt, the vast majority of the newer plants already have the technology to do this. So we have toxic air pollutants, including mercury, have declined dramatically since 2005. They've installed scrubbers and others that we've talked about, but it has to get even better. But as we say, you have to do it so that it does not cripple a economy or a business, but the businesses cannot be immovable. Next, let's look at the local, regional, national, and global air conditions.